Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out, promoting professional wrestling. What is the difference? How did they promote wrestling back in the territory days? And how is it done now? Well, at some points, I don't know that any independent wrestling show, I'm kind of wondering if they promote all the time. But I believe back years ago, and this is the way it was done. It was very important to have a television program. Without a TV program, you were not going to be successful in the territory days, especially during the time of television. Now, prior to that, all they had to do was run a newspaper ad. Everybody read the newspaper back then. So you put a big ad in the paper and you said that, let's say, Frank Gotch was going against Joe Stetcher, probably going to be a sellout if people thought about the show and wanted to buy a ticket to see the show. As years went by, especially when television came along, it was very important as a territory system. If you didn't have a television show, you probably wasn't going to be successful at that time, especially when television hit. It was, in some instances, Dothan, Alabama is a very good, I guess if we was going to say an example of this, Dothan, Alabama had a higher share of people watching wrestling than watched the news. That's how big wrestling was on television in Dothan, Alabama. And the power of that television was very important. We were there several times when they do a major angle on television, and we seen the power of television. And the power of television back in those days, and this was 1983, they did a thing with Lord Humongous and Ron Fuller. They built this thing up for how many weeks was this, Rodney?
Probably about 4.
For about 4 weeks, they make this big deal. Lord Humongous is always messing up or he's doing something wrong. And Ron Fuller comes on television and tells everybody that they had better tune in today because he's going to show how to discipline the children.
That's right.
And they do the angle. And how many people, Rodney, do you think the week prior to this, how many people were at the?
You probably had about 1,000 people at the Farm Center.
Very next week, they shoot the angle on television. Lord Humongous picks them up, chokes them. The guys come out. Bob Armstrong comes out. He makes the match, changes the match. Lord Humongous against Ron Fuller at the Houston County Farm Center. Tonight, the matches have changed and went from 1,000 to over 5,000 people. 1 week. 1 week. The power of television. It was very important to have television program back then. Without it, you had no way to tell your story. You had no way of developing your talent. And people ask, well, did they do radio advertising? No. Didn't do a lot of radio advertising back in the territory days. They did start doing radio advertising in 1984 in Mid-South Wrestling. Jim Ross brought that to the table. Jim Ross had an advertising agency. I don't know if, I'm guessing he got his 10 or 15% back from whatever he spent, but they started buying radio advertising in that territory, and it helped it. And I believe he might have been the first person to really use it big time in that territory. They kind of knew who was coming to the matches, and they were matching it up, and they were doing really good with that. But if you look at Georgia, I don't think Georgia Championship Wrestling ever used any radio.
Nope.
They did buy a newspaper ad, though, every week. And sadly, because they wanted it in the Saturday paper or the Sunday paper, they usually would tell the people what the matches was. So, they had to smarten up the the editors of the newspaper. But they wanted it in there. They wanted it in the next day, or they wanted it in on the Sunday paper. They wanted to make sure that those people, because back then they were reading that paper. Today they just line their cat litter box with it. But back then, people actually read the newspaper. And they didn't buy other television advertising because the television was their platform. Now, Jack, I'll throw this at you because you just done a show, Wrestle South. By the way, if you've not went to it, it's WrestleSouth.com. They just ran a match as of this. It was Saturday, May 8th. Jack, what did y'all do in advertising a little different? Because you don't have a television product. So how did you do your advertising to get that?
No, well, we did, of course, posters, but you have to do posters that are eye-catching now, so that because people really, people are busy. They don't pay attention, so you got to put out something that's going to catch their eye. We did a lot of posters. We did a lot of handbills at different stores that would allow us to put them up on the counter by the registers. We got a tremendous response out of that. We did several thousand of those, and we did radio. Now, radio is not commonly something we would think about doing, but in Arab, the radio station is owned by Michael St. John. And of course, we all love Michael St. John. And Michael not only gave us a great deal, but Michael knew when to insert those commercials for us and do those ticket giveaways at the right time when he had the most listeners. He didn't waste our time, by putting us on at midnight, because nobody's listening to radio at midnight. We were drive time morning, we were lunch break, we were afternoon drive times. He knew where to hit us. So that was a tremendous help. We got a lot of people off of that. But social media has changed the entire perspective of what we do here. And almost, I would say 75% of what we drew still came because they saw the social media. They saw that, we bought advertisement and targeted it to that. I think it was a 15-mile area. That's what the last thing I did. I had done it statewide at one point, but the last series of advertisement I did, we targeted to just a 15-mile area, and it hit, I want to say it was like 10,000 people, specifically, because it lets you, if anybody liked anything to do with professional wrestling, it showed up in their newsfeed. So, there's social media has changed the way everybody advertises. Now, eventually we're working towards getting a show going. But again, we're going to limit what we show. You're not going to be able to sit at home and see a Wrestle South show in its entirety. You'll see bits and pieces. You're going to see interviews that we do, promos, and, enough to get you enticed to come out and buy a ticket. But if you want to see the Wrestle South show, you're going to have to come see the Wrestle South show.
And wrestling is made to be a live show.
Yeah.
It is made to be a live show. It's not a television product. You just don't get that same effect on that. Rodney, now wrestling, they did posters. Now, back years ago, they did posters, but only for the spot shows.
Right. Because of the power of that TV show. Yep. And they invested a lot in the TV show. Many of the markets would pick a local personality actually to host the show. Dothan, Alabama, for years were hosted by local personality there. Charlie Platt was one of those personalities that became, big. Sterling Brewer in Birmingham, Harry Thornton was a huge morning show, talk show host, hosted it for years and probably the top rated morning show in the whole, but it was locally based, and every one of these shows were locally based. And I think one of our insiders was talking about, as far as Dothan, the formula was destroyed, and that wasn't just Dothan that happened. That was in a lot of the places. Having an established arena that you were at every week was also very helpful. Which that would be difficult today to book. I mean, there would be some arenas, but a lot of the arenas that occasionally I still play wrestling, so I have to go and see what kind of bookings are, what's going on in these different shows in these arenas, and there's just not a place where you could do weekly events. It's not, the dates are not available. I was just doing this before the pandemic took place, but yeah. We're talking about local personality in Memphis. I mean, Lance Russell and Dave Brown. Lance Russell, newspaper. Dave Brown, weatherman on Channel 5. They were important. They were very important. And establishing that show is very important. And like I said, having weekly events also very important in developing those shows. That was part of the advertisement.
And developing the characters that you saw and we did not call them characters, by the way. You were wrestlers. You develop a wrestler. You would actually get one over. That basically what you're saying. We've got to get Tommy Rich over. That was the whole deal. And for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, you're going to get Tommy Rich over. That was the most important thing for you to do, is get Tommy Rich over. If Ted DiBiase came in, okay, we got to get Ted DiBiase over. And they knew how to get him over, which I don't know that professional wrestling, especially the big organizations, know how to get people over. I'm not for sure they even understand the concept of getting somebody over, and they should, because if you watch Star Trek, they do get Captain Picard over. Mm-hmm. I mean, they do get him over. They do get the Borg over, so they do have the concept. They just, for some reason, don't use it in the writing of professional wrestling. But as far as promoting, it was completely different. It's a different concept today than it was then.
Sure.
Because today, you've got so much that people, so many ways to connect with people today, and a lot of people doing some great stuff. Russell South, about 400 people, 420, somewhere around there, at the show Saturday night. Just a spectacular crowd. Wrestling is on its way back. Pro wrestling is on its way back, I believe. I think that WWE they'll always be there. I don't think they'll ever go anywhere, but I think pro wrestling is on its way back. If you enjoyed this video, give us the big thumbs up, subscribe to the page, go one step further, hit that notification bell, and share the video. Until the next video, thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.